We have new episodes dropping every other week. You can find them early on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, or wherever you find your podcasts, or find the link below for our Megaphone landing page, and we will see you around the campfire. Hey, it's Paul.
Hey, it's Jess.
Welcome to Campfire Ashes. Now pull up a log. Let me tell you a story. Denise was 3 hours down a deep rabbit hole on YouTube. She was shaking, watching one bad conspiracy theory after the next. Her hands trembled. She could barely wipe the tears from her eyes. Each video centered across references on the spree of websites and other browsers that she didn't even know existed a day ago. Weeks ago, she would laugh at the idea that were batted about in these videos. She heard faint footsteps on the other side of the door. Her eyes were locked on the doorknob to see if it would move, and she was shaking so violently she could barely focus, only glancing down for a moment to make sure that the chair was wedged against the door that would hold. A light giggle, and the footsteps moved away down the hall. She sat quietly for a few moments to make sure that she was alone again. She gasped for air, suddenly realizing that she had been holding her breath the entire time. Which one was that? She waited in her room till she heard the door open downstairs, and she rushed down the steps to give her father a hug. She felt safer when her parents were in the house. The eyes still felt trained on her, but at least they felt like a shield. Her two sisters ran into the room to hug her, and the familiar feelings of dread flooded back. She sat on the couch, shaken to her core, as a pair of identical faces flopped down next to her. For her entire life, being a triplet always felt like it brought joy and comfort, but no more. When you stare at your face too long, you know your face. And when you see either of them smile, you can pick out the little things that don't quite look right. Daria's smile always had a little crimp in the cleft of her palate. And Dana's smiles always curled slightly more on the corners of her cheek. Those idiosyncrasies were gone, replaced with a perfect alien smile that no one else seemed to notice. The changes felt like a lifetime ago. The curled smile was the first to go, and then a few weeks later, the crimped smile was gone. Both were replaced with meaner arguments. More than their sisterly shouting matches, more than the usual sisterly rivalry. The snide remarks were more hurtful, more pointed. She never felt more alone when she should feel like a club of three. The night was worse. The first night or two after the changes didn't seem any different. Then Denise woke up to see Dana standing over her bed, head tilted to the side, staring quietly at her while she slept. When pressed about it, she just shrugged and went back to her own room. Weeks later, Daria did the same thing, with Dana in the doorway watching the exchange. They giggled to themselves and scurried off when caught, and then the whispered start. "You don't belong here. No one likes you." That would startle her out of her sleep. She would shoot up to look around, and no one was in the room, but always the quiet pattering down the hall. She told her parents, but they never noticed the sounds and wrote it off as sisters being sisters. They continued in the daytime, moments where she thought she was alone and made her feel uneasy. "No one likes you. You don't belong. It'd be better if you just weren't around anymore." Then even TikTok felt like it was a warning to her. The same trending sounds over and over again.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide.
A few times she even looked up to see them in the corner of the room smiling at her. Those smiles were always a little bit more sinister when the parents were home. They didn't bring her comfort like they always did. Those smiles sent her to the room to isolate herself. They would open up the door and just stare at her. Even when she closed the door, they invaded her space, studying, poking, prodding like evil scientists observing a specimen before dissection. She started blocking the door with a chair. They would play with the doorknob and test to see if it could open, and when it couldn't, they scurried off, or they would just stand there, giggle, and whisper, "You don't belong here. It'd be better if you weren't here anymore. You should just end it." And those words cut. They isolated her. Her sisters were never that cruel, but those words felt so foreign, almost alien, but definitely evil, and they wore on her. They destroyed her self-esteem, so she retreated into her room, and then to the internet. She started researching the TikTok trends that sent her down this rabbit hole of analog horror and paranoia. The more research into fairies and other crazy conspiracy theories. Each theory felt crazier than last, but each had elements that felt like it was what was going on. The theme they all had in common was what scared her the most. They all ended with her not making it out of the other side. Almost an inevitability. Whatever the monster phenomenon was, if it wanted her, it was going to take her. Her father yelled up the stairs, "Don't forget tonight's date night. Money for pizza on the table." She sat at her desk, frozen in terror, and then the giggles turned to cackles. The familiar patter of feet up the hallway was doubled, and she knew that they were both on the other side of the door. Little scratches at the door, and then the jiggling of the door handle felt somehow scarier than normal, and the whispers felt all around her. "It would be better if you weren't around anymore. You should just end it. We'll do it for you tonight." An hour later, her dresser replaced the chair to fortify the door. She made some cryptic posts on Facebook about this being her last night here and how much she'd miss her friends. Ha emotes and hug hearts filled her notifications, but no one questioned it. She silently cried, holding back the loudest sniffles and just the painful, quiet screams. It was dark now. She didn't see her parents off, even though she knew for certain this is the last time she would see them. A sort of resentment and bitterness kind of welled up in towards her and towards them. They didn't believe her, and likely wouldn't even notice if they took her. They obviously missed the signs twice before. She was curled up on the bed in the quiet, staring at the door. Her parents would be back around midnight. What were they waiting for? The house was quieter than normal. The pings and creaking from the water heater turning on, and they sounded like they were being played through a speaker. The mice scurrying in the walls, the tree limbs rustling outside her window. It was all magnified. Her eyes shot to the crack under the doorway. The hall light was on. The patters came fast and aggressive. They slammed into the door with the weight of something that was so much heavier than a pair of 16-year-olds. They struck down the door again and again, forcing the hinges off the frame. Denise pressed her hands over her ears, cringing at each slam. She couldn't even brace against the dresser, but she almost welcomed what was coming after her. She was tired. She thought deep down that this was their plan. Why fight when you can just break down your prey little by little, and this till their will was gone? And she started crying. Did this happen to her sisters? Did she miss the signs when they were reaching out? Did Daria suffer? Was she even alive? Did Dana reach out when she noticed the changes? Questions swirled in her head. Confusion and guilt swept over her. It was dizzying. The world around her snapped back into the focus. The hallway light was off. The house was dead quiet. As she looked up to see the door was blown off the hinges and the dresser was partially pushed forward, but not far enough for them to get in. Did they give up? She slinked off the bed and crawled towards the door. Smash! The dresser crashed to the ground inches from her feet, and the door fell to each side of the furniture, cracked clean in half. She could see the dents of the wood from the fist, and she peered into the dark as she scooted herself against the wall. Nothing but giggles and whispers. "You should just end it. We'll do it for you tonight. She'll take good care of your family." The hallway lights turned on abruptly, stinging her eyes. She put up her hands to try to focus. Daria and Dana were at the door, giggling and smiling. Those perfect alien smiles. They both glanced back into the hall at their bedroom open, and it creaked. The third perfect mirror smile that didn't seem quite right walked into the light. The giggles melted into a menacing laugh as the three sisters walked into the room. Their eyes turned to Denise one last time and smiled again. "Oh, look, our sister's finally here." Denise screamed as the three rushed at her. The TikTok trends always ended before she saw what happened to the victim.
Is nothing sacred? Can I not have TikTok now?
So this
Man.
specific story is based on the alternates, and you've probably seen that TikTok around. It's been growing.
Yeah.
It's been growing a lot of trends, and it's that and I played it in the song, or I played it in the thing. I didn't play it for you, but it'll be in the into the story itself. But yeah, like I've even done one or two of the trends, and it's very, very creepy.
You don't say. Really?
Yeah.
I'm not over here shitting myself or anything.
So basically this is an amalgam of a couple different stories. Basically it's a changeling. It's what we're talking about as far as what these lore and everything like. I mean, there's more closely to the Alternates story, which is an analog horror series on YouTube that started a couple years ago, and that has been growing uh, with so much steam on TikTok, which you've been seeing a ton of. There have been a lot of like horror makeup artists and stuff like that really kind of running with this and going pretty strong. And if you see our TikTok, like I did one that was kind of bad. I've got a couple other ones that I want to do that kind of fit in with this. But the Alternates are a group of things, extraterrestrial or evil or demon, that are a hive mind kind of thing that take over people. Typically, they wear down their defenses until they are so tired that they end up taking their own lives and then just assuming that role. Or if they don't take it, then they murder them and take their spots.
I don't like
I figured you weren't. So
it. No, I don't like it.
so the idea of changelings really hits me because I, like, anybody who knows me knows that I have a heightened uncanny valley response where
yeah.
anything that looks close to human but not quite human creeps me out to
Me
no
also
end.
as well. Me also
To-
as well.
To no end. So the idea of putting the character being a triplet and noticing the very, very subtle differences of a person taking over their sister, I think was way creepier because
Oh, that's absolutely terrifying. I'm like, wow, I've never been so happy to not be a twin.
yeah, a twin or a triplet.
Even though I wanted to be a twin and I was supposed to be a twin, but I absorbed her in the womb.
It's okay. That's what it's.
Well, we wouldn't have been identical, so it defeats the purpose. But anyway.
It's the plight of the left-handers.
Stop.
What? It's a theory
true.
that like left-handers like were originally twins that we just absorbed the other one.
Well, I know I was supposed to be a twin and I absorbed her, so it makes sense.
Well. But so these are not doppelgangers. So like we use the word doppelganger a lot when we talk about this type of things, where you're talking about like pod people or these changelings or anything. Like doppelgangers are not that. So doppelganger is it's a word. It's a German word that basically is more of a ghostly paranormal phenomenon where if you see another version of yourself, it's typically like an apparition and it means a bad omen. But it's not typically what we're thinking of. When we think of doppelgangers, we think of like a different us walking around somewhere. And that's not the word. That's not the origin of the word. Because the origin of the word was from 1796, and it was basically an omen where like you saw this character, and this character was like in a much worse version than you because like they have gone through something traumatic, and it was basically warning you of a trauma that was impending. But that's
supposed to be like the picture of Dorian Gray, where the picture absorbs all of like the aging factor.
Not really, but kind of. Like
Okay.
it's a similar thing. Where basically like if you're driving and you would see like you standing on the train tracks, it was just like maybe you're going to die from a train kind of thing. Like it's basically like seeing that version of you somewhere. You're going to have a traumatic experience, or you may have had a traumatic experience that you didn't know in that area, and it's like kind of like residual energy or future energy like manifesting itself. That's what a doppelganger is, at least in the terms of like 18th and 19th century literature when the word was like created.
Okay.
It's not actually what most people think of when you think of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or things like that. Like that's not a doppelganger. That's just that's more closely to a changeling. So a changeling is kind of what this is or these other characters are.
Changeling is a type of tabletop RPG that I know of because shout out to Allie. Allie keeps trying to get me to play it, and I'm scared of it. For good reasons.
So a changeling is basically a creature that has taken the form of another person. So typically what changelings were fairies would take a child and send it to their realm to be a slave until it died and leave in its
lovely.
place a perfect replica. And that replica was typically a very fussy, very irritable child. So like people that misdiagnosed like colic and like fussy babies were just like, it's a changeling. And it's like, no, it's just not. It's just a fussy child. It's not a demon, and your child is not in the fairy realm working. Like
Scientific reason for my child to be irritable? Nah, no thanks.
yeah, no thanks.
Changeling? That's the only reason. That's got to be it.
Mm-hmm. And shout out to your last week's episode, changelings. One of the descriptions of what a changeling might be is a child that may be sickly, that does not grow to the size of a normal child, and may have notable physical characteristics such as a beard or long teeth.
No.
Yeah, so changelings
That's a whole lot of fuck that.
feel like there's a little bit closer to leprechauns that we talked about last week.
No.
But
I don't like
these
it.
but these versions of that descriptor only exist within Irish and Scottish legends. So
Convenient.
changelings are a relative of leprechauns, at least in those like areas.
Do they wear red?
No, they do not wear red, and they do not wear green.
Sounds fake.
But typically you would look for signs of them not being normal when people didn't know that they were being observed, and it was typically like the weird things like you were talking about, where it's like they would just like spin on their heads and dance around. Like that's a weird thing with the changelings. Like it's another thing. Also the ideas of changelings, the reason why you didn't just take your kid and leave nothing there, is that human milk was necessary for the fairies to live. So they would confiscate a child so that way there's a better chance of like pilfering breast milk away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You little weirdos.
Yeah. Or the changeling would would steal the mother, so that way the mother could basically become like a cow for other fairies.
Ew.
Yeah.
I don't like any of that.
And that meant that like certain, like in some cultures, midwives, for example, were not widely used because they were thought to be like the emissaries of the fairies, delivering the fairy children to the families and then scurrying off with the actual baby back to the fairy realm. Yeah,
It's getting worse.
it does.
My body, my choice, bitch. Stay away
Yeah.
from my milk.
But anyway, the alternates, the version that I base most of the story on is an analog series. If you can actually listen to the whole series or watch the whole series in a couple of hours. Like you could probably watch the entire thing in a couple of hours if you watch them back to back to back. They're only about like 10 to 15 minute things. But they're very creepy. They're very weird.
You could, but should you is the real question.
Maybe not. But alternates, at least in the Mandela catalog, which is the name of the series, are a major antagonist, They're a mysterious hive mind species that plan to eradicate humans by mainly driving their victims to suicide um, and then basically uh, uh, taking their place.
Hmm.
And there are different versions um, of the alternates, which are like doppelgangers, which of course not actually a doppelganger, um, but like they're impossible to or nearly impossible to differentiate from the originals. Then there are the unspeakables, which are like the versions of the doppelgangers that haven't grown faces. They're kind of faceless versions of you, but
Do you
they're
mean like
stronger,
Amish dolls?
kind of.
No.
But they're more powerful because like
No.
they haven't taken their human forms yet, and then they're flawed impersonators, which are um somewhat more like fairies. So like when you think about fairies and you think about the fairy lore and things like that, fairies tend to have asymmetrical features. They tend to
Oh.
be they tend to like have something that's not quite right with them. So like they might have a longer arm than they should, or like a longer earlobe, or
You're
like
gonna have me like overanalyzing my own body in a
no,
mirror after
it's
this. I'm just weighing it
no,
out.
no. I mean like exaggerated version,
No, I know. But I'm
like your
about to
arm.
be like, oh my god, I have one extra eyelash in my left eye than my right eye. I'm not real.
No, we're talking like your arm is like a foot longer than your other arm, or your
I
earlobe is
know.
like 3 times the size of your other ear. Not
I know what you're
like
talking about, but hi, I'm paranoid.
yeah, no.
Have I been replaced?
Um yeah, and
Man,
then
Tom is
then you
gonna have
have
a great day today.
and they've been building on the lore of these alternates, and like there are different types of alternates and flawed impersonators and tulpas and stuff like that. There's a lot of different things um with the alternate series, and it's kind of an interesting thing to do. It's weird, it's very creepy. So when you hear that if you see someone with your face, run and hide, that is directly pulled from this series. That is audio ripped directly from the Mandela catalog.
I
Like
just
that's
want you to know when we're done recording this, I'm about to run downstairs, violently shake Tom out of whatever he's doing, and be like, if I was replaced, would you tell me? You have officially set the course for the night. It's not good.
but if you've been replaced, would he know?
Oh god. Oh, this is
Would he
hold on.
know?
Sidebar that's totally related. So, back to the whole I was supposed to be a twin thing, and I know that I was supposed to be a twin. My mom, shout out to my mom because I know you're listening. Hi, mom. One of the worst things that she ever did for me was tell me this information because now I often, and I mean often, spend days where, not the whole day, but spend time out of certain days being like, if my twin was real, would I live my life or would she have lived my life? Like, would I have gotten into the relationship that I'm in, or would Tom have fallen for her? You know, things like that. And it just
Oh
really
my
messes me up if I
god.
spend too much time thinking about it. And now you've done this.
I
And
I
now you've done this.
I'm sorry, Tom.
You just broke me.
I am sorry for the ridiculousness that is going to be happening um to you for the rest of the night. That was not my intention.
Honestly, I think if I like get a snack, take a shower, and go to bed, I might be okay. But for now, I'm not in a good place.
So when we think about changelings in a modern sense, everybody tends to go towards Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which um was an amazing movie.
I
Uh,
loved it.
did you see the original or did you see the 1978 one? So the
Probably
original is like in the The original is
78.
like in the 50s, and the 1978 is the very famous one with Donald Sutherland.
Yes, I know I've seen the Donald Sutherland one. I don't think I ever watched the original, but I can't recall.
So the
But I
Donald,
know I've seen the 78 with Donald Sutherland one.
yeah, when like Nancy runs to him and he turns around and like screams at her with that like pod person scream.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, such a haunting ending to a movie that was so well done.
Such a good film.
Yeah, if you have not seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1978 version, not necessarily the 1956 version, and definitely not the like 2000s or like horrible remake.
I forgot that it even existed. I like omitted that from my life.
Yeah, I didn't realize it until I was like thinking about it. I'm like, oh wait, yeah, they did try to do this again, and it did not do great.
We don't talk about it.
Yeah, we don't talk about it. But I mean, it's that same concept of like emotionless things taking over you, and of course, like this was all born out of like the communist panic, dealing with counterculture and people that were once normal people suddenly becoming hippies, or hippies suddenly becoming the yuppies and the more like put together kind of people in like the 80s. So like a lot of this is basically talking it's all brought about by the fear of counterculture, or at least in the modern interpretation of it. Whereas like the characters of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they were like ex-hippies, and suddenly the Body Snatchers are viewed as like the industrial wheel that like we're all stuck in, whereas like they wanted to be themselves, and it's everything is conform, and that is the horror at the base of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is like your inability to conform to a society that you don't want to be part of, and that's where those come in. But those are very, very different. Like it's weird because like as much as I love this story, the idea of alternates and the idea of like changelings, there's so many different things that bleed into each other that it's very, very tough to be like, hey, this story is this one thing, when it's really not. Like the idea of like doppelgangers, again, like we use the word doppelganger, but doppelgangers does not really apply in the literal sense of what the word originally meant. It might mean something much different now, but it doesn't quite encompass what we talk about when we're talking about like seeing someone who looks like you. Because seeing someone who looks like you might not necessarily be an impending alert of doom, which what a doppelganger is actually supposed to be. It's more of a changeling, but then the changelings don't necessarily conform either, because typically a changeling doesn't make it into old age. They die young, or they disappear or whatever, because they were never meant to be in this world for long. They were meant to always go back to
The fairy realm.
the world of the fairies and all that kind of stuff. But you always had to watch over your child. You would to ward off changelings. You could put all of your coats inside out. Like inverting your coats was something that apparently creeped out changelings. I would have to assume it has something to do with button placement and things like that, because like when you talk about some of the things that are common about all the fairy lore, it is order and numbers and things like that. So like inverting it, changing the order of things, creeps out a fairy, and it runs to its comfort, which is also weird because like fairies innately aren't symmetrical creatures. So it's very weird that fairies are so obsessed with numbers and this kind of numerology and things like that, when they as a species don't adhere to it.
But like, I don't like when things are inside out or not the way they're supposed to be.
Oh no.
You're breaking me further.
Do you leave your scissors open?
No, that bothers me.
Okay.
There's
Oh,
a chance.
It does bother you?
It would bother me to leave them open, so I guess
Oh.
there's a chance I'm okay.
No, because that's actually the thing.
Here I am thinking 2 weeks ago you're a weirdo because you do sock shoe. Now I'm like, I might not even be real.
Yeah, because one of the things the things that charms that would irritate a person or irritate a fairy is inverted coats and leaving iron scissors left open where a child sleeps, because it would ward them off.
Now wearing my okay, well, first of all, I wouldn't leave scissors of any kind even near a child, whether opened or closed, so there's that.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't.
But yeah, no, I don't like wearing things inside out, but that's like a textured sensory issue thing for me. Or so that like looking at it and being like, oh, I don't like how that looks.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm human. I guess I'm normal.
Yeah,
we're safe.
It's possible. So the idea of changelings actually have a very much more nefarious real world implication. There's a folklorist who proposed in an essay that the changeling stories were actually a cautionary tale in survival in pre-industrial Europe. So basically, the whole point of a new child coming into your family is that is going to be a financial drain and a financial burden that you might not be able to survive. So they talked about this child being a continued threat to the sustenance of the entire family, and changeling tales supported infanticide as a frequent solution to their problems. So basically, it's like, no, it wasn't our child, it was a changeling, because they were using up more resources than they probably should have as a child, and so that's what would happen. Is
but like no. Whoa, this is illegal.
Well, yeah, well, it was illegal back then, but it was also like pre-industrial Europe doesn't have DNA. Like they didn't have like Sherlock Holmes wasn't around to the 1800s. So like there weren't detectives around explaining why these people died. So it was just like, oh, it was a changeling going off into the nether realm, not like I smothered my child because he was eating too much.
God damn.
Yeah. It was very creepy.
It's just morbid.
Yeah, but I mean, it does make sense. It's like it's the whole constant idea of like when you're talking about like we're going way back into like serfs, and indentured servitude and things like that, where like you would make like next to nothing. So the idea of another person coming in and siphoning off any of those supplies that you might need are very creepy. So sometimes when we talk about the lores and legends, sometimes they bear out from a fear that we have, and a lot of times, at least in the idea of changelings, it is that fear of not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, and kind of villainizing the child. Like we have that in modern society. China's one child law for the longest time was, up until very, very recently, you could only have one kid in China. And the thought process was because there were too many resources that child could take, and therefore you're only allowed to have one. And they would kill women. They would kill females because they wanted a boy. So like if it was if
Oh boy.
they had a girl, that girl would just kind of poof off somewhere.
Man, anything to
Quiet.
kill women, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Anything to put women down, huh?
Yeah. But I mean that's kind of how that
That's
went.
history.
It's basically like if in certain like rural areas that baby didn't just magically got sick and died, when realistically they probably like killed the baby and smothered it, and it's like, it died in its sleep. And like they would probably, like, if I were to look something up in China, they would probably have something similar to the changeling lore.
I bet they do. See, now I'm gonna have to look it up because now I need
Yeah.
to know.
Yeah, now I would look it up. Like, again, there were so many different things that that had this. It's one of those ones. It's the first, probably the first story that I've looked up that had so many different things that it was very hard to pinpoint what part of this piece of lore fit what part of this kind of thing. Because again, even using the word doppelganger is wrong in most cases of what you think of when you use the word doppelganger. Because a changeling is historically referred to as an off or an oaf. It's basically like a human child, believed to be a fairy left in the place of a human, typically a child stolen by other fairies. And like I said, that's where a lot of this comes from. And it's scary that a lot of this comes from like, we're just excusing infanticide because like our kid didn't make it. It was acting kind of weird.
We're just excusing infanticide. Teehee.
Yeah. Because
Ridiculous.
the changelings were always viewed as those things with ravenous appetites, and so frequently mentions that the parents saw these kids as like, oh man, this kid's eating so much more than he would, or so much more than he should, and I was just like, well, the
Wow,
kid just
imagine a
isn't gonna
child
make it.
being hungry.
Yeah.
Insane.
Mm-hmm.
This is getting me mad.
Yeah. Apparently, there is a case from a woman named Bridget Cleary, which is one of the most well known cases of an adult thought to be a changeling by her father killed her husband in an attempt to force the fairies to return his real wife back. Or no, her husband killed her.
He
Basically,
killed
just
her because he thought she was a changeling.
yes. And
Weird.
that was his way of like, give me back my real wife. Well, it was your real wife. You just murdered her. When you're there's other forms of like where like some of these changelings that have made it out through their childhood forget like who they are, and they don't realize they're a changeling, and they just live a normal life, and it's just weird. There's so, like I said, there's so much that have to do with the idea of changelings, but again, they don't. The alternates seem to be like their own thing. Like when this guy made up the Mandela catalog, these seem to be, they cherry pick little things here and there to kind of make their own thing. So like the alternates are in essence their own cryptid, their own thing, because while they behave similarly to changelings, while they even call themselves doppelgangers, while they call themselves tulpas, which are another creature entirely, they while they borrow language from them, in essence they are a form of a changeling, but not quite a changeling. So it's very interesting. You probably do something with just alternates on their own, but as far as something that inspired them, most likely the closest thing to an alternate would have been a changeling, and not necessarily a doppelganger or a tulpa. It's weird. It's weird. Like there's so much.
It's a lot. There's a lot.
There's so much folklore, and that's when, like you said it last week, when you're dealing with leprechauns. Once you start delving into Fairy folklore, there are thousands of different interpretations and little changes here and there. So like even when you're talking about like a leprechaun, there's like 9 different versions of a leprechaun.
Right.
Like, so when you're talking about changeling, there are dozens of different type of things, and they're very different from not only like country to country in Europe, but even different locations within the same country have different folklore. Like in German folklore, changelings could be the devil. Like even Martin Luther, the guy who basically founded the Protestant religion, advocated killing changelings, even though like you have no idea what the hell a changeling actually is. They could have been dwarves, they could have been water sprites, they could have been a rye mother. Like there's so many different things. And then in Ireland, the changelings are actually closer to a leprechaun. In all of these different countries, things are so different. Some of them even rival pixies or evil pixies and or trolls even. Like there's so many different things that kind of all have some type of thing from changelings but aren't quite changelings. And that's why like fairies are fairies but they're not quite fairies, because there's this fairy and there's this fairy, and you could be using the same word for like 8 different types of things. So that's why it's very tough to like talk about changelings and talk about the alternates and talk about this, because all of these kind of feed into each other, but they don't really fit each other. Because like a changeling, invasion of the body snatchers, alternates are all basically the same functioning type of creature. They all have at the core the same thing, where like something that was once you is no longer you. But once you start going into them, despite them being so closely related, there are so many idiosyncrasies in each version of it that they just are so different that they're basically their own things, even though they're still using the same term, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So yeah, alternates, changelings, those are fun things. Those are creepy. And then if you go even into like D&D lore, changeling is a very different thing. They're evil, cunning, immortal things that
they're definitely still fae.
Yeah, they're definitely still fae, but they're different even from there. So like even though they're using the word changeling, just wildly different interpretations of it. So it's very tough. But I wanted to get this story out because like I'm loving that that TikTok trend, and I was just like, I'm going to write something towards that. And then while I loved the research side of this, it was so tough because while changeling is closest to what the alternates were, even that isn't quite the same. Because like pod people were going to be even closer to it, and pod people were something that was completely made up through the novel itself,
and still terrifying.
Yes, it's very terrifying, but I loved it. I hope I creeped you out with it.
You did great. I'm terrified. This ruined my entire night. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Tom. And remember, last one out douses the fire. If you heard something, no you didn't. If you're here with us next time, it means you made it through the morning.